name is Bill Sweeney. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, better known as IFES. We have been engaged in a partnership with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee since November of 2015. And this is the 21st panel discussion we've had on the various topics around women's empowerment. Now, IFES comes to this debate with a very, very simple rationale. Our business is elections. Let every voice be heard, let every vote be counted. That's our mission statement, very, very simple. And more than half of the world's eligible voters are women. And if you look at the statistics from International IDEA, only about a third of the world's eligible women are registered to vote. And then if you look at participation statistics, country by country, precinct by precinct, you discover that not enough women who are registered are showing up to vote, and they are under-registered. And if you are in the elections business and you care about this thing, small d democracy, and having every voice heard and every vote counted, hence, IFES is engaged in the issues around women's empowerment. And that is a long-standing, permanent commitment. We have engaged in women's programming and gender programming and women's training and gender access in countries from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe and all points in between. We are engaged in multiple fora around the world to discuss the issues of gender empowerment and how we create more and more opportunities for women to lead, to participate, to be involved, to fulfill their civic responsibility as citizens. So that's why we're all here. And today we have a fascinating, fascinating area in accord with the overall Sustainable Development Goal, this one number 5, about achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. And what we are going to be talking about today is technology. And technology is one of those wonderful things. If you don't use it well, then it becomes a knife that cuts very, very quickly and does a lot of damage. If you do use it well, it becomes a scalpel, and it can heal or take some problems out of a society and help that society move forward. And so to introduce our panel, which is a terrific panel, and as you all know from their resumes and their past accomplishments, we're going to learn a lot today. This is going to be another very exciting panel. I'm going to turn it over to our Director for Women's Empowerment, for Gender. What other titles do we have for you, Doctor? We've run out of titles, okay. Specialist too, all right. So Gabrielle, take it away.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank all of you for being here today, as well as the Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee for continuing to support this series, which we are really thrilled to be a part of. So, as Bill said, we have a really exciting panel lined up for you here today. I'd like to introduce you to them and get started. We will each discuss and we'll talk for about 10 minutes about what they're working on and the ideas that they're sharing with you this afternoon, and then we will open the floor to your questions. But directly to my right is Gwen Young. She's director of the Wilson Center's Global Women's Leadership Initiative and the Women in Public Service Project. Right? There's, as you said, qualified panel. She is passionate about women's empowerment and has worked on the topic from African conflict zones to academia to policy spaces. She's probably a familiar face for many of you. She is a lawyer and a public policy expert by training with more than 20 years of experience in international public service. And she will be talking today about briefs of innovative ways that technology and tech-based tools and solutions are empowering women in politics worldwide, drawing on the global experience of the Wilson Center, as well as talking about that double-edged sword that Bill talked about and some of the ways that it can pose specific risks to women in this space. Just down the row here is Dr. Laura Hinson, who is a social and behavioral scientist with the International Center for Research on Women, ICRW. And she is a PhD from the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she has worked for over 8 years now on really innovative and interesting technologies and methodologies for researching how evaluations of programs have an impact on women, including new measurements for that. And so she'll be talking about one of these new measurements today, specifically ICT-facilitated gender-based violence, and talk about how to measure technology-facilitated violence. And finally, at the end of the table is Joanne Antoine, who is Manager of State Outreach and Engagement for Common Cause Maryland. And in that role, she works on outreach plans for key policy campaigns, especially around money in politics and voting rights. She engages state, local, and national organizations and coalitions in campaigns. And Joanne has worked in the United States and also in Haiti. So she'll bring the conversation back home, talking about tech and women's political participation here in the U.S., including recent women-led online movements and efforts in Maryland and the impact of and solutions for unregulated social media electioneering here in the U.S. So with that, I will turn it over and we'll get started with Gwen. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Gabrielle, and very excited to be here with all of you. So let me tell you a little bit about what our project does, because we actually use technology. So the Women in Public Service project is very simple. We have the goal that by 2050, women will hold 50% of government leadership positions across the globe. So this is local, this is national, this is not just political and elected office, but it's military, police forces, and civil service. And so when we were deciding sort of how we're going to get there, and we did set our timeline way out, I would like to say, but we thought that we should use data and evidence-based. So we have built an online data platform, notice the word online, which implies technology, and we have built an index for 75 countries that measure how women get into public service, what positions they hold, so what are the leadership positions, and then how much power they hold once they're in office. And the reason we chose an index and an online data platform and data in of itself is that we know that, one, transparency will drive change. So once you realize where women are or where they are not, governments will be inclined, voters will be inclined, people will be inclined to want to change. We also knew that then you could use the data to find these creative solutions of how are we going to get there in terms of gender parity and gender equality. Now, we're finding a lot of things, and one finding which is relevant to this discussion is that women are 2/3 in basically health and education ministries, which is probably something we all know and you all know. They're about 18% in infrastructure or internet ministries. So right now, some countries that have like IT ministers would be Canada, South Africa, Israel, and Colombia. So they're also going across sort of the typical economic divides of countries. But when you think about how important the access to technology is, or how important roads are, for an example, and the women are not there at the table, the argument is the services and policies that are designed do not reach them. The second, sort of framing thing that I wanted to talk about was a little bit about this sort of how does government use technology to make government better, quote unquote, right? And one of the ways that they do that is by sort of providing sort of online systems and access to information. Now this is interesting because women's access to information and men's access to information in a lot of countries is very, very different. And when women lack access to information, they lack an understanding and knowledge of their rights, but they also are more challenged in terms of entering public life, entering political life, and so forth. So a government that can use technology in order to make services and information more accessible is very useful. Here in the United States, part of what the digital service team was working on was like the Department of Veteran Affairs. How do you access your services online? Angola, Botswana, Rwanda, and South Africa all have websites that tells you about the government services, where to go, what type of information you have. When you've been in places like Haiti and Africa, it's not all that evident. And for women to even enter the civil service in many countries where I go, they don't even know how. To run for office, they don't even know how. And so having it on a website where you can access it on a telephone, right, is one step towards raising women's awareness that they can actually do this. A couple other interesting things, the Punjab population in Pakistan, which is the largest population in Pakistan, they have what's called the Punjab Commission on Women. You as a woman can go there and get access to how to get your government services. If you don't get them, how to get them. There's a hotline and an online reporting system for violence against you. So this is another example of sort of a use of technology that governments are using to make government services more accessible. And a final one, I'm trying to sort of bring it down to setting this up for the more specific issues. One that I really love is in Morocco. They have what's called Sim Citoyen, which is a cell phone-based platform where parliamentarians are able to communicate with people in the villages, and people in the villages are able to communicate back via SMS or via phone. And if they are not literate, there are voice activated systems where they can report their complaints, and the parliamentarians are encouraged to use this platform to reach out and talk about what the government's doing. So all of these are kind of the positives, I would say, of how technology can get government services out there, how you can use transparency. Where are women in government? Studies in the gender field show that the minute you make pay transparent, the pay gap narrows, because once people realize where people stand. So I think there's a fair amount of sort of positive. On the flip side, though, is that there's a huge digital gender gap, right? So women's use of the internet specifically is about 12% lower than men's use. In many countries, it's either a cost barrier. Women simply don't have access to a phone or to the internet. I was sitting with an Indian minister and we were talking about youth education and online sharing. He's like, but more than 50% of the population doesn't have access to the internet. So what do we do with that? So part of it is that women are disproportionately, they have disproportionate access to the internet. And then using the internet requires a certain amount of literacy and knowledge in addition to having power and internet accessibility. So what happens is you marginalize women and you end up with one group of women and you increase the gap either ethnically or socioeconomically. And then arguably you don't have the people in government that look like the entire population that the government is designed to serve. And then the second thing, which I think is going to be the next speaking, is sort of the online harassment. Even in the United States, 25% of young women say they were the target of online sexual harassment. So this happens everywhere and it happens across the globe. And we're hearing a lot more about it now than we did 5 years ago, but in some ways it's probably similar to how it was 5 years ago. But right now people are standing up. But when you go places like Kenya, there was a whole bunch of cyberbullying in the 2017 elections. The UK, the Italian parliament, people received direct threats. They received, online threats. They got graphic images of what was going to happen to them. And, and then there's this sort of social movement piece that comes out of the internet and what you want to do against somebody or what you want to do to make sure that your voices and your viewpoints are heard and the other person's are not. So I think the risks are sort of what we're moving on to now, but I don't want to lose the fact, and I think we're going to go to the end of the panel, we can talk about some of this recruitment. But I think one of the important thing is, it does allow for reach. It allows women to know their rights, get access to services, exercise themselves in a different way. In a lot of countries where women honestly don't leave the house by themselves, if they did have access to internet, cell phone technology, and computers inside the house, there's many things they can do, from online, educational courses to communications. But, we have to still really work on the safety of that, which I think becomes one of the big issues. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Gwen. It's fascinating to understand the huge potential of this space and also the new risks that are posed. I was particularly interested in how you talk about increasing gaps within the groups of women. I think it's a good reminder that this is an intersectional issue, that access to technology varies profoundly across different socioeconomic groups within any society, and that includes women as well. And because of that, the issue of online harassment is also one of great importance because it is often targeted specifically at women in politics. But thank you so much. We'll move right on to Laura, who has some PowerPoint slides for us, so she'll speak from the podium.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and thank you so much for the invitation to be on this panel. ICRW focuses a lot on research, so it's really great to kind of hear different perspectives from the policy end and other organizations, so I'm learning a lot so far. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project we've been doing on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. But before I get too far into the weeds, I just want to back up a little bit and talk about what is technology-facilitated gender-based violence and why is it important. I think we probably can guess, but it is a little bit of a jargony term. So really what we mean by this is actions that harm others based on their sexual or gender identity. It is actions carried out using technology, internet or mobile technology. And it includes behaviors that you're probably already familiar with in the gender-based violence world, such as stalking, sexual harassment, hate speech, just to name a few. And what do we know about this issue? We know that it occurs worldwide. This isn't just an issue happening in the United States, this is happening everywhere, and it covers a spectrum of behaviors. We know that this issue is gendered, meaning that it happens to people because of their gender or their sexual orientation, or it happens because it's reinforcing gender norms of some type. We know that this issue has severe impacts on the people that experience it. And we know that there are very few interventions out there that are designed specifically to address this issue, to prevent this issue. So I think we have a lot to learn in terms of how groups like law enforcement, the tech industry, and other support groups can help prevent this issue. And I think, people read about this issue, you hear about it on the news, you hear things about the girl getting bullied at school online, or the woman whose boyfriend uploads their sex tape to many different websites, or the female candidate who every time she posts something online gets a barrage of misogynistic commentary. These are the stories that we hear and know about, but there's actually not a lot of research out on this topic. What we do know comes from some small studies with heterosexual students from schools in high-income countries. We really have very little information about these issues in low and middle-income countries. And a lot of the research is focused on single issues like cyberbullying, online sexual harassment. We're not connecting the dots because people are experiencing a lot of these different things all at the same time. It isn't just a single behavior, single issue, single platform experience. So what are we working on at ICRW? Not surprisingly, we started with the literature. So what's out there? What do we know about this topic? What do we not know about this topic? And we also talked to a bunch of experts, other researchers, advocates, practitioners, people who've experienced this issue. And from there, we developed a conceptual framework, sort of pulling all these behaviors and experiences together under one umbrella. Then the mandate of our project that were funded to do was to develop measures. So we have this thing that we're calling tech-facilitated gender-based violence. How do we measure it? And I say measure, and what I mean is if we're going to do a survey with people, what are the questions we're going to ask them to get them to say, yes, I've experienced this, or no, I have not experienced this. So from this framework, we developed these set of measures to try to capture this issue. And we went to the field and we talked to victim survivors of this issue, both in Uganda and in India. And the goal of this study was to really try to understand, when we ask these questions, do people understand it? Do they resonate with these questions? Is it capturing their experiences? But through these interviews, in addition to that goal, we also learned an incredible amount about how pervasive this issue is and what different forms of it look like. So we're still ongoing, we're still getting the data in from both sites, but it's been really, really fascinating. And then just along the way, we've been maintaining our conversations with all sorts of different people because this issue impacts stakeholders and audiences all around the globe, and new audiences for me as a researcher, such as the tech industry, which is still kind of a vague, bizarre thing to me, but it's been very interesting having these conversations. So this is our conceptual framework. Don't be scared, I'm not going to go through it in detail and bore you to death, but just to show you that this is kind of where we've landed. And the top part of it is sort of what's really core to gender-based violence as we know it. It starts with a relationship. In the case of gender-based violence, it's often a personal relationship, but for this, it could also be impersonal, it could also be institutional relationship. On the left side, you have the domains related to the perpetrator. So you have the behavior, which is what, again, we're used to seeing, the stalking, defamation, bullying, sexual harassment, exploitation, and hate speech. And behind those behaviors is a motivation and intent. Why is this person doing it? What's driving this person to do these things? But this box below is really the deeper dive into technology facilitated aspect of this. It's important to capture the frequency. How often are these things happening? How many different offenses are happening? What are the different modes that this is happening through? Modes being the technology, right? So the social networking sites, the dating sites, the communication technologies, the entertainment sites, the personal online accounts. There's many ways we're connecting to technology, and all of these invite this issue to happen through them. And then lastly, the cross-cutting tactics. And this is, again, what's a little bit new about this issue. So these are the tools that the perpetrator uses to do these behaviors that are listed above. So doxing, hacking, threatening, image-based abusing, gender trolling, and using fake accounts. We sort of categorize them under these main tactics. And then on the right side, kind of reflecting the victim survivor's experiences. So what's the impact this is happening? What are all the different ways that a person can be impacted by this? And then finally, what are their help-seeking and coping strategies? Are they reporting it through, for example, Facebook reporting mechanisms? Are they seeking counseling services? Are they telling other people, or are they just completely going offline and not doing anything about it? And of course, all of this is my favorite part. Down at the bottom, it says context. So all of this is surrounded by a social, gender, cultural, legal, political, religious, and technological context, because we know that what is violence, what is offensive differs by context. what's offensive in India is not offensive at all in the United States, vice versa. So it just adds a layer of complexity to this. So next, I just wanted to share experience from a woman I talked to a few weeks ago when I was doing the interviews in Uganda. And she was a university student, and she had been running for political office within her university. And so I talked with her about kind of the various experiences that she's had during her campaign. So on the left side, you'll see reflected the experiences that she had. She had her identifying information exposed on social media. She received a barrage of repeated and unwanted messages from a wide variety of strangers. She received misogynistic posts on Facebook and WhatsApp groups. She had multiple accounts of hers hacked. She received all sorts of threats, including physical threats, to harm her. And she also had photos of her, like screenshots taken from her Facebook page and then manipulated to be pornographic images and then recirculated on the internet. This is all in relationship to her campaign. She also experienced many other things in her personal life. And the impacts that this had, we spent a long time talking about all the different ways that this impacted her. Not surprisingly, sadness, depression. She had a lot of guilt. She really withdrew socially. She didn't go to parties. She avoided certain routes to avoid talking to people. She was very embarrassed by people on campus looking at her and feeling like the things about people said about her online were true. She lost a lot of opportunities. She declined various professional opportunities or was not invited, again, social opportunities and also financial opportunities. She said that she walked in fear, and she actually changed her route, so she was going to school during the evenings, but she switched so that her classes were during the day because she was afraid for her safety. And lastly, she scaled down her political ambitions. She lost the campaign at the university level, and she said, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I will run in a small, in her college, she was willing to run in campaigns, but she wasn't going to go any bigger than that. And another woman I spoke to in a very similar situation actually said, I'm done with politics. I will never do politics again. So these experiences have very severe impacts on people. And this quote at the top was just very poignant to me. When you are a woman in politics, you suffer twice. She just kept coming back to that. So what can you do? The first thing I would say is just learn more about this issue. We've recently published a brief. I have a few copies. If you're interested, let me know. Otherwise, it's available online on our website, and I'll show you that information in a second. These are a beautiful brief. And just, Google, look around, see what other groups are doing on this topic. Of course, I'm a researcher, so I have to say support more research on this topic, because as I've said, we don't know all that much. And really importantly, facilitate conversations. Just have conversations with policymakers, with research, with advocate, with the tech industry, so that we can brainstorm together, because this solution is going to have to be multifaceted, and we have to talk to each other. Implement the U.S. strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally. It was updated in 2016, and the definition of the forms of violence now includes technology-facilitated violence. And then, of course, protect foreign assistance, because we do have dedicated funds for gender-based violence, which again includes this aspect. So that's it. Here's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Particularly interested in this as at IFAS we work on really similar topics in the more narrow space of specific to elections and politics, and the complexity of this is fascinating. We talk about it as an ecosystem of violence within cyberspace, because it is coming from so many different platforms, and also globally technology is different. It's not necessarily smartphones and instant internet access, but it can be old-fashioned phones and radio, and technology is broad still. And we're talking about measuring it not in the old-fashioned terms of only incidence and frequency, but also volume and speed and the reach of these things. So it's a really important topic to understand better. We'll turn now to our last speaker, bringing it back to the U.S. From Joanne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to IFAS and Gabriella for having me here today. I'm excited to be part of the conversation and to bring the perspective of an organizer who's working on the ground and how these tools have been helping to engage more women in our work. So just really quickly, a background on Common Cause. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit grassroots organization. We're focused on building a democracy that works for all of us, right? We want to make sure that Americans have an equal voice, and that your voice and your vote is counted. We are a network of over 1 million members. We have 30 state chapters, and I work for our Maryland chapter in Annapolis. And in Maryland, we're focused on a number of good government reforms around the issues having to do with money and politics, voting rights, redistricting, and more. So Common Cause is different from all the organizations here in that we're not focused specifically on women. But as a Black woman who works for the organization, I've seen how our work has opened doors for more women to step up and run for office, how we've trained women who are now advocates, who we see in Annapolis and who we see lobbying their county councils and city councils, and just women who are part of our coalitions that are helping in our work to build an open, honest, and accountable government. Now, I'd say out of our 1 million members, a fraction of that being in Maryland, most of these people take their first actions online, right? Technology has really allowed for us to be able to engage our members in all throughout the country in the work that we're doing. A lot of those members being women who we know that we need in order for us to have a functioning and thriving democracy. And I'd say from my experience, right, whenever we have women at the table, whether it be as a volunteer, as a coalition member, whether it be our work with an elected official, we do see that the conversations that we're having are different, right? We're having different discussions, we're discussing different topics, and our solutions to problems that we have been working on, we see that they are shifting and changing. Now, historically, right? As women, we know that we have been fighting for a long time to have our voices heard, right? And as I'd say Black women and women of color, that's even more for us. But I'd say technology has allowed for us to really find new, creative, and affordable ways to amplify our voices and to really engage in the political process. And at Common Cause, I like to think that we are meeting women where they are, right? And where we are is online, right? Because if you're not engaged in our work already, the only way that I'm going to be able to get you involved, right, unless I meet you at a community event, is through our engagement over the internet. And I think a lot of this is intentional on our nationals part. We've done some recent changes. We have some new tools that we've been using. And, as an organizer, I'm always keeping in mind that we have to meet people where they are, right? And a lot of times, most of the people that I want to work with, most of the women that we want to engage aren't at the same place, right? And I'm looking at this as someone who grew up in a Haitian household, right? In a house where my parents didn't talk about politics at all. They still want to know why I'm working in this space. So, the technologies that we've been using have allowed for us to reach a lot of those people who weren't part of the conversation before. And I'd say it has allowed us to, have a more engaged, informed, and trained group of activists that are largely made up of women. So just really quickly, because I know we're short on time, right? I wanted to dig into some of the tools that I've been using to activate and engage our members throughout the state. Now, when we're talking about grassroots lobbying, we use a tool called Action Network, right? I'm sure you've seen a lot of grassroots organizations using it, a lot of national organizations. Action Network allows us to do our first go-to, right? Send an email. Emails are good because we're able to send you a lot of information all at once. All of our emails include a call to action, so you're able to quickly click on a link that is either going to have you sign a petition, send a quick pre-drafted email to your representative that you can go in and edit. We have a new tool that allows you to click and write an LTE and a letter to the editor and have that letter be quickly sent off to a number of news outlets, right? And all of these tools have been helpful to us because we're always keeping in mind that a lot of the communities that we want to engage might not be able to come and meet me on a Wednesday afternoon at 6 o'clock for a roundtable, right? You might not have the time to sit at your computer and type up a LTE. But with these tools, at the click of a finger, right, quickly, you are able to take an action. And if it is an action that is you're lobbying, let's say, your delegate, right, your state delegate, you can, on your phone, quickly go and watch the live stream of the hearing that they're at, right? And you know that you had a voice and that you contacted your legislator and you let them know where you stand on this position, on this policy. I'd also say we use a lot of webinar tools. Again, we've been focused a lot on training our members. A lot of the women who take advantage of our citizen activism course are women. So we want to make sure that we're not just sharing information, but that we're providing women with tools they need to go out and lobby for the things that are important to them. We've used a lot of things. So in terms of mobile applications, I'm sure, you know, November's right around the corner, so I'm sure you guys are getting a million text messages from candidates. So we want to make sure that we don't abuse that, right? We don't want to annoy people. People will opt out. But we use that in order to send out action alerts when it's really needed. And I'll use our New York chapter as a good example. We just had primary elections in New York last week. There was some messaging going around saying that polls closed at 7:30, right? Which isn't true. In New York, polls close at 9 p.m. So really quickly, our ED in New York took action, gathered up a number of our members, reached out to other states, and within minutes they were sending out thousands of text messages to people who may have received this false information, and people who are largely African Americans that they wanted to keep away from the polls. I won't dig in too much more. Just the last one, which is good, I'd say Slack, right? I don't know, has anyone here heard of Slack before? Okay, Slack is an awesome tool. We use Slack at Common Cause internally just to keep from there being 1,000 emails. But in Maryland, I find that a number of women's organizations or a number of women-led grassroots movements have been using Slack as a space to gather, support women candidates who are running. So a lot of times I'm in these groups, someone will share a logo that they're considering for their campaign, and I could quickly respond and say, you know, maybe not this color, right? Because it won't look well on a yard sign. We won't see it at night. So women have been using tools like these to support one another in ways that we haven't seen before. And then I won't go too much into social media. I think Laura did a good job of highlighting a lot of what we've been seeing online. Obviously at Common Cause, we use social media as a way to amplify all the other ways that we've been sharing information with you. But I'd say in terms of social media, I think even more women of color have, I wouldn't say we've found our voice, right? Because we've always had a voice, but we've found ways to really make sure that we are being heard. Twitter's a good example of where we say Black Twitter, right? And Black Twitter won't just be us talking about insecure, right? It's us, you know, having conversations about things that happen or things that are happening in Chicago, right? Us figuring out what action we're going to take to hold X elected official accountable. And at Common Cause, we've been trying to find ways to really tap into that and to make sure that these women know that we have resources that you can use that can help you do that work. And obviously, you know, when we're looking at social media, who here has ever seen an ad that you clearly know is fake news, right? Or you've seen a tag made on a woman of color who is running for office, or just any woman in general, right? And there's no way for us to really control that. There just is always going to be trolls. But Maryland recently signed into law something that is similar to, I think it's the Congress's Honest Ads Act that never really went anywhere. But, you know, in Maryland, we have a new number of new regulations that require for social media platforms to report and keep a database of political ads. It also alerts the Board of Elections when there's like a foreign IP address or foreign currency used to pay for a political ad. And I don't want to end on a negative note, right? But this is, you know, I'm highlighting this to say that the movement, the activism that we're seeing happening online is only going to continue to grow, right? And while we can't control the negative pieces that are coming out, we can hold the people who are sharing these ads accountable. And even though this law that passed in Maryland is being challenged at the moment, we do see other states following in those footsteps in making sure that when women are using tools online and we're using social media, that we're protected and that we can take some action when needed. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I love the organizer energy. It's, I'm scribbling notes with so many good ideas. You said two really key words for me, and those are, first of all, affordable.
Mhm.
You know, I was just talking about this last week in Korea, but money is frequently cited as the #1 barrier to women's political participation, and media is the #1 cost for political spending. So making this affordable, making this accessible is so important, and you've given us so many good ideas for that. And also the flexibility of it. You know, the gender division of labor is not changing tomorrow or anytime in the immediate future. And so flexibility really matters, and bringing the mountain to Muhammad is, well, is that the expression? At any rate, bringing it to spaces where women are able to integrate it as part of their daily lives is just really key. So thank you for that. At IFAS, we really care about this issue deeply. We are working to leverage new technologies to promote women's empowerment across the countries where we work. We're also using tech solutions to try to figure out exactly what is happening in these spaces. And I won't talk about it now, but we do have information outside on our what we call Violence Against Women in Elections Online tool. And we're using this in Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka and Ukraine, Afghanistan, and many other places to get a handle on what's happening on social media through sentiment analysis, trying to understand that. So if you're interested, come talk to us. But we'd like to turn it over to you now and hear your thoughts and your questions. The floor is open. So yeah, we'll just see a show of hands. Thank you. Yep. And please speak up and introduce yourself. We are on Facebook Live.
Don Laycock. And I just had a comment. After hearing all of this, I heard nothing about prosecution. Like your example of the lady who was so harassed there. Did anybody try to go after the people? I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's how you change that kind of thing. It is illegal. Somebody's got to stand up and go after these people. And where is that research?
Yeah, I think in a place like Uganda, there aren't a lot of laws and legal structures to support that kind of prosecution, unfortunately. And I mean, it's still such a new issue. I think a lot of systems are still grappling with what to do about it. I know in her case, that wasn't the focus of our research. It was more on the types of experiences and the direct impact. But we did kind of tack on a question at the end that's like, did you do anything to try to solve the issue? And in this case, she said she talked to another professor who ended up finding out who the people were and talking to them directly and telling them to stop for some of the cases. So, you know, that was a little outside of the system, but that's
illegal in Uganda? That's what was done
probably
there in
not.
Uganda?
I don't know the legality framework of it.
I was going to help you. I mean, I'm a lawyer, but and so we'll just start there. And I've happened to work on international criminal law for a while too. And I think part of the good and bad of this is the spread of technology has just been so rapid, right? That the law and practices can't often keep up, which is what goes back to I was really happy to see your thing, sort of the frequency of it. But then a lot of this, as it ties to politics, to be controversial, relies to people's perceptions of what's just politics, what's abuse that you should take when you put your life out there in the public sphere, right? And so part of this goes to a lot of things in the gender equity is changing people's perceptions, because even if it is in law, it still has to be determined by a judge based on either definitions of violence and having worked over the globe sometimes. But a lot of these things, these sort of cyber or technology crimes, I'll call them, the law hasn't kept up and people haven't been able to figure out. In the same way, I was in law school in 1999, way back when, and we had 2 classes dedicated to will we ever be able to control the internet? Will we ever be able to control things like cybersecurity and so forth, and how much? But I think going to your point, I think part of it depends really on where you are. And then the second thing depends on what's people's perception. There's a big belief even in the US it comes with the territory. You know, and so if you pull up the picture, you Google the president of Croatia, one of the first pictures that comes up in Google is her in her bathing suit on a beach with some comments, right? So that's kind of embarrassing, right? And so it's sort of like that, but that's the association, the perception of what that is. So I'm not defending it, but I know in Uganda it doesn't happen to be, and I'm guessing in many places they haven't kept up with doing the exact definition and all the elements.
Thanks. And I'll jump in as well. Absolutely. And I think our biggest case is probably Zimbabwe at this point. We researched what was actually happening with this type of violence online. And the major solution that came out of it was how to deal with the question of impunity. And that comes on a few fronts. First of all, it's not just the cost of the situation. Women themselves need to recognize that this is violence, that it does fall under many parts of existing criminal codes. Law enforcement agencies need to recognize it also. Prosecutors, the police themselves, the first responders need to understand how existing protections do exist and need to be enforced. Advocates need to understand what the gaps are for that, and training needs to take place. So in Zimbabwe and elsewhere, this is what we're trying to do. Legal reviews to understand how the legal codes respond or don't respond. Working with women themselves to recognize what constitutes an act of violence, and also how to document it, because meeting evidentiary standards for this type of issue is really hard. Anyone you talk to, straight down from the presidential candidate of Rwanda a couple of years ago to local candidates, if someone puts up a deep-faked image of you, pornographic, whatever, the first thing you're going to do is hit delete, delete, delete. That's natural. But you've just destroyed the evidence. So you need to work with women who are frequent targets of this type of issue to understand how to document what's being happened, screenshots and phone call records and all of this stuff. Work with these women to document their stuff, to bring it to the police, to help the police understand that this is actually a real thing that they need to respond to, and then supporting them through the system. So we are trying to address this, but again, it is the Wild West of the legal system here and around the world. And there's just a rapidly evolving consciousness on a lot of levels for it. But thank you so much for that question. Yeah. Okay.
My name is Dr. Beck. I come from Kyrgyzstan. It was a great pleasure to hear your case studies. And I worked also with the representation of all women at the political and decision-making level. And we have more of the same issue, but it's connected with the gender sensitivity. Even inside the party, the sensitivity is low, and therefore, roles of political parties are important, for example, to respond for this kind of issue, the position of the political party. Did you kind of look at some findings, like what was the position of the political parties in Zimbabwe, for example, to support, for example, if, let's say, yes, it was argument, or what was the, internal party regulations rule?
I'll just repeat the question for folks on Facebook. It was a question from Kyrgyzstan about the position of political parties. How are they supporting victims? How are they dealing with this on an internal regulation perspective? So I can talk about Zimbabwe, but you're the
in Zimbabwe case, it's not in Kyrgyzstan.
Zimbabwe is an interesting case because it was a transitional election. So Mugabe was there for 30 some odd years, and during that period of time, the police were often viewed as a partisan actor. So after the transition took place, the police and the prosecutor's office really opened up to said, no, we want to turn a new leaf, we want to establish ourselves as an independent agency. And parties were working with that type of opening. So I think it depends very much on the context of the country. In terms of political party regulations, political parties around the world increasingly are recognizing that women are the majority of voters, and so they do need to not only attract that constituency, but also hold their own supporters accountable for their behavior. And there are codes of conduct that many introduce, and the growing awareness of what happens in these online spaces is something that we're seeing increasingly integrated into political party codes of conduct.
Hi everyone, my name is Amber Whittington with the Center of Excellence on Democracy, Governance, and Human Rights with USAID, and so we actually fund this. I was just curious to learn a little bit more about programming to actually train political aspirants, female political aspirants in this area. So they're running for office, they're interested in running for office. What does programs look like to actually bolster their skills to react to bullying and cyber issues? Thank you so much.
They do exist, some of them. One of them that's interesting, I find, I'm actually going to go watch next week, is training women once they get in office in their social media use. It's done through the Women Political Leaders Forum out of Brussels. And so part of it is, I think a lot of people like NDI and IRI and ICE and others, you try to often work through the parties on how you use this sort of once you're you know, once you're running, and I don't know if Common Cause and some of this talks about sort of safety and that sort of thing, but I know that there's a lot more of webinars, things happen sort of once you're in office about how to use and how to respond to the social media, and it's usually going for the women themselves, but it often goes through parties. And I think the thing that people are really working on is going back to making sure that all women have access to that, and that it's sensitive to these specific issues that women are facing, and not just for the whole party, and to make sure that there's an access piece of it. But I think, you know, Facebook is actually funding a fair amount of initiatives on how to use Facebook, and I think, you know, sort of training and helping people figure out what and where and how to use that. We at the Wilson Center actually do a cybersecurity boot camp for members of Congress and congressional staff on how to look at various pieces of legislation and so forth. And I've worked with various in-country groups in discussing putting these issues on women's leadership development training. Part of their communications training is including these issues of the safety and security. But I don't know,
At Common Cause, we haven't, look, we don't offer any training like that. You know, in my work, especially when I'm in Haiti or working in the Caribbean region, I kind of just always give the women a list of do's and don'ts that I've found helpful. Obviously, if you're a candidate, you want to make sure that you have members, or I should say volunteers or supporters, who are there to help amplify the positive that you are sharing, right? So making sure they're coming on to like, share, and when they share that they comment, because it helps reach a larger audience. Making sure that the candidate is not having debates under, you know, how you guys will go on a post and there's a number of, you know, back and forth on there, right? Not engaging in conversation like that, because it does nothing to help your campaign. But outside of that, we haven't, you know, developed any training on best practices for social media and how to protect yourself.
I'll add to that as well. I think there needs to be more space, more safe space for having conversations about what are the options out there, what are the tools, how can we adopt this. And it's not only for women in politics. You know, we see a lot of this coming at women who are engaged as executives in electoral management bodies, civil society, which is of course an enormous training ground for women in politics. Anywhere where women rise above the surface and become publicly visible, they also become lightning rods for this type of thing, and that can become a deterrent for once they get to politics. So I would broaden that pool, but there needs to be space to talk about this. These tools sound awesome when you hear about them in a room like this, but when it comes out to do it, it can be intimidating, especially in places where technology capacity is lower. A few weeks ago, I was at a hackathon, they called it, for gender issues, and it was great. They gave you a t-shirt, they said take off your heels and your suit jacket and everyone's comfortable here. And it was just sitting around a table trading ideas and talking about how did you deal with this, what's this tool, what is Slack? I don't know, you just said that across the table and I wrote it down, I'm like, I'm gonna have to ask her in front of you. You know, yeah. But being able to have that kind of conversation and networking with people, spanning the generational divide also, because that's a huge issue in this space. Younger women are coming up, and we need to have that cross-pollination of initiatives. So for me, that would be a real space to develop in this area. Yep.
Hi, Liz Hedge from the Women's DC office. I was just wondering, forgive me if you mentioned this at all, about internet access. I know we talked about actual tools of mobile technology, et cetera, but if a woman is in a remote area or even a low community in the United States, then there's potential of not having access to Wi-Fi. So I was wondering if that's a barrier, or if that's kind of, not so much anymore, that Wi-Fi technology is becoming more consistently available across different countries and communities.
Yeah, I actually talked a little bit about that. There's actually the ITU does some work, and there's a digital inclusion. I mean, on average, women's access globally is about 12% lower, but it varies by region. It's 25% lower in Africa and so forth. And that access to it puts them behind in so many other ways, including running for office, right? Including being engaged at anything beyond a community level, including mobilizing. But we do know that the access, and then the other point that we were talking about before, I think too, is that you also are isolating socioeconomic class, and you're isolating urban from rural areas, and you're isolating large segments of the population from having a voice. And if the idea is that some people believe that your government should look like the communities with which it serves, or at least at a minimum it should make policies that serve all communities. That lack of access to the internet and the Indian figure, where it's about 50-50, which is interesting because I think many people don't often think of that. And that lack of access starts with things like, where do you go to school, what careers are possible, all kinds of things about just how much information you have. And if you aren't able to do that, or you have to actually travel to meet somebody, going back to your point, much less in Annapolis, outside of Annapolis. So it's the figures are really low, and it's probably one of the biggest challenges. And the access is also, it's by location, it can be by cost, depending upon, this can cost a lot of money in a lot of places, right? And then you have to pay the fees to actually have it be a smartphone on top of that, or to have an SMS. And if you're paying per SMS, that's a very different thing.
And I would just add that another complex piece of the access issue is, in a lot of places, technology is shared. And so women's access is mediated by men controlling that access. And so their ability to control what she's able to access is a challenge.
I'd also add, in 2015, I worked on a campaign in Haiti, and the culture shock for me, again, I'm in Haiti all the time, but I'm used to having access to everything when working on a campaign, and it was difficult for me, right? I'd say on top of not having 24-hour access to the internet because of my candidate not having a smartphone or not having a computer that worked well, right? There was this issue of not having 24-hour power, right? Electricity, which makes it even more complex, right? Even if she has a smartphone and she can't charge it, right? She's not able to do the outreach that she needs to do.
Yeah, and just, again, technology varying across the world and bringing adapted technology solutions according to what's available. Radio is still the #1 technology in a lot of the parts of the world where we're working. And I'm curious to see, with our research, we've seen very much absolutely concentrated in urban areas, the online stuff. But how does it spell out? Because the radio DJs and the others who are consuming that media coming out of the capitals, they're consuming that abuse or those images as well, and then diffusing it through lower level technologies to other rural areas. So,
well, and it made me, and I think we'll learn, Gabrielle, the other thing that I think is interesting too is the assumption that technology is not regulated at all in certain environments and so forth. There's many places where you actually can't get on a Skype or a Facebook, or that, and even if it's radio, that it either gets left out or whitewashed or changed or altered, the control over it. So the plus side of, you can mobilize an entire population to have an Arab Spring. There's that side, but this is not everywhere. And so not everywhere do you have unfettered access to the communication channels you want, and even if it is radio versus sort of the online thing. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you go to Ethiopia and you cannot use Skype or Facebook, period, no matter where you are. And so that becomes a cemented thing, or the SMSs are blocked, and during election times, as I'm sure there's many places when all of a sudden your cell phone carrier is no longer sending SMSs for a variety of reasons. And so you got to think also about issues of where you are and what that control is, going back to the shared and unfettered access.
more questions? Yes, please.
My name is Naviha. I'm with the Discovery Learning Alliance. It's a nonprofit, and part of the work we do is with adolescent girls using media and especially video technology to train them, give life skills training. And I was wondering if there are open source training tools, specifically in video, that are targeted toward adolescent girls, and that could potentially be customized for countries in Africa or around the world.
Can I ask, so, and maybe I missed the first part of that, and I love your organization actually, but when you say videos, is targeted at what specifically? Sort of online trainings are you talking about? Are you talking about use of internet and technology?
Life skills training, also introducing them to positive female role models and encouraging them to become more active members of the community, and including political participation. So these are videos that we often would customize and sometimes translate them into local languages.
Yeah, I've seen some in my development, work, but coming out of either sort of, small outlets, or taking some of the work of the Gina Davis Media Institute and others looking at this, and in Iran. There's actually really interesting videos around that, but they're coming out for more. I've seen them. I don't know if other people have, including ICRW. I've seen them come out of sort of smaller, on the ground. You know, like in Senegal, there's actually a group that works on political campaigns across Africa and on communications, and they've developed these specifically for the context and in the specific language. In terms of sort of broad brush, does a big NGO or does the Wilson Center particularly have something? I haven't seen. I think people do a lot more of that online or in-person training.
Yeah, nothing's coming to my mind. I'm sure someone else in my organization might know more than I do about that, so you're welcome to follow up with us.
And I know there's a DC-based organization called Girls in Politics. They bring young girls to DC. I think it's a camp, a boot camp or something like that. That might be a resource. I know it's not available in other languages or anything, but maybe this is where you're able to partner and develop a training. But I think it's Girls in Politics.
And I'm just jumping in and sort of thinking too, I think, you know, something like Plan International, I know, does a lot of work like this, again, going back to the NGOs, and I know Running Start and NDI are working together to look at young women across the globe, and so there's probably pieces of that, whether it's, you know, set up as one video that can be adapted, I do not know, but I think, and I'm happy to help make connections as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. At IFAS's level and with other organizations that do similar work, a lot of the work that we have done in terms of identifying female role models or identifying potential female political leaders and otherwise, these tools are developed, and then the diffusion method is in online channels. And I've seen in kind of parallel spheres taking on traditionally male roles or activities or otherwise, but using webinars or YouTube videos or other to have them taught by young women to take that space back. So whether it's construction or how to repair your sink or how to engage with these other technology careers, developing those short YouTube clips and others has been really effective, and I think we will be seeing that more and more in this field as well. But thank you for the comment. Are there more questions? Well, we'll be happy to talk to you after the official panel is closed here. I want to take this opportunity again to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee and IFAS as well for all the team for bringing this together, and to our fantastic panel of guests. So thank you all for coming.